What is going on, everyone? Today we have Anthony Doe, who's been with Gigster for quite a long time, one of the OGs, who's going to be coming in to talk about Agile Fall, which is a pretty interesting kind of delivery methodology that we've seen a ton of success in. Anthony himself have over 20 years of experience in consumer software as a product manager, producer, game designer, and Agile coach. And has worked with people all across from gaming to Web3 to social media, healthcare, e-commerce. You kind of name it. He's been there. He's been with Gigster for now, I think, over 5 years, and has worked on a number of different projects. So we are very happy to have him with us. Anthony, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Corey. How are you? Wow, my face is really big. Maybe I
No,
should sit back a bit.
yeah, well, it's
But
it's yeah. I think mine is just like I'm far away from my camera, so I always look like a tiny little head compared to like if people are on a laptop.
I
Always the
think
thing.
I think you got it set up optimally. No, it's not you. I think it's the right size for you. It's good.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, man. Well, dude, thank you so much for coming and being a part of the show. I don't know the show, the experience, whatever we want to call this thing. That is our time together. But happy to have you on. Excited to hear about Agile Fall, um, and learn about kind of the differences, like why this might be good. I haven't looked through any of the material yet, so I'm kind of just riffing on what might be in there, but we'll figure out in real time. So with that, maybe just start with a quick intro. I know I gave a little bit of background on you, but just so other people can hear, and if I missed anything.
Sure, yeah. I think you covered quite a bit of it, but in case people join a little bit later, yeah, I've been working in product for over 20 years, 18 years in game development as a game designer, producer, product manager, and I also served as a PM for over 5 years at Gigster, and late across working across lots of different business verticals and different products. Lots of very exciting projects that I was happy to work on at Gigster, and then right now I'm serving as a head of product at a Web3 fashion metaverse company called Space Runners.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. Um, well, good. Again, so I'll turn it over to you. I'll let you go away. But before I do, I just realized I wore a hat this weekend, and I've got like a hat tan line. Like I wore my hat backwards, and you can see where the hole in the
Oh,
hat went.
I didn't notice it until you mentioned it,
Oh wow, I
but
should have.
it's
Oh, now I see it. Now I can't unsee it. Anyways, okay, I will flip it over to you, my friend. And with that, go ahead and take it away.
all right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Let me share. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Okay, let's try this. So I'm hoping everyone can see that. Okay, I'm assuming that everyone can. So welcome to this talk. This it's called Agile Fall, maneuvering through waterfalls in an agile way. And in case you're wondering, this is the first woman who threw herself over Niagara Falls in an oak barrel. So her name is Andy Edson Taylor. She survived to tell the tale, but I highly recommend that you guys don't try this at home. So let's have just quick introduction. There's lots of different names for Agile Fall. So it's sometimes called Agile Waterfall, Water Scrum Fall, Scrummer Fall, Hybrid Agile is some of the names. So there isn't really like one clear term, but I think a simple way to call it is Agile Fall, which is really different ways of expressing combination of Agile and Waterfall in a single framework. Well, what does that mean? Let's think about that. And first, let's examine the terms. So, first of all, what is waterfall? Um, Probably a lot of you guys know this, but waterfall is a traditional project management methodology. It's typically linear and sequential. It's designed to kind of be to function in these long discrete phases where each phase must be completed before the next one starts. And typically, the value of the product is delivered only at the end, and it's really not meant to be an iterative process. What is agile? Agile is both. You can think of it as fundamentally a set of values and principles, as Agile started. around 2001 with the advent of the Agile Manifesto, which is defined by 4 values and 12 principles. There are a number of, from a methodology perspective, there's a number of popular methodologies, including Scrum, Kanban, and Lean. And as you can see in the bottom right, you can see some of the contrast between Agile and Waterfall from a high level. So you can see what you see here is that there's several cycles that happen as opposed to one big cycle, and value is delivered incrementally at different times. And the idea is that doing so mitigates the risk of development. So if we take a step back, one way you can think of as what Agile is, here I mainly pasted the 4 values of the Agile Manifesto you see on the left, which is individuals over process and tools, working product over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following the plan, where the idea is that things on the left are basically a higher priority than the things on the right. Not to say the things on the right aren't important. And I won't read the 12 Agile principles to the right, but it is very principle centric. And fundamentally, you can think about, in terms of in relation to the methodology, the methodologies and tools are designed to serve the principles, right? So it's not the other way around. And basically, the values inform the methodologies, but the methods there exist to basically to allow for the realization of the principles in practice. So if we were to just take a quick comparison, you can see at a visual perspective some of the differences, right? So like, as mentioned, waterfall happens in these big phases. So if you think about like a plan, build, test, and release cycle, it happens like in these big phases, one after the other, right? Whereas with Agile, you see the idea is that these cycles happen much more often and much shorter time periods, where the idea is that you take each of these and they're just sort of squished within a shorter time frame, which we call sprints, right? So and bottom really quickly illustrates what an Agile Fall type of framework might look like. You would basically, it combines both, right? So you see basically this planning, build, test, and release, but within them, there are these shorter iteration cycles. So that's where you see the combination of Agile and Waterfall. So let's do a quick exercise. I actually don't know if I can get responses, but let's see. Okay, let's try a game. As I mentioned, I love games, and formerly was a game designer. Let's see, there's a chat. Okay. Yeah, so let's try a game. It's a multiple choice quiz. So what would that look like? Let's call the game Is It? Okay, is it Agile, is it Waterfall, or Agile Fall? Or none of the above? So let's just try this out. I'm not sure if I'll get responses, but let's just play this anyway. So the idea is that for each of these things, we're going to identify if it's one A, B, C, or D, right? First one, making a copycat game from a 150-page GDD. This is a game development project where a tower simulation game is copied exactly in terms of its game design, game mechanics, and its design, but it's basically reskinned and it's based upon a 150-page GDD. Is it Agile, Waterfall, Agile Fall, or none of the above? So this is, okay, I see a response. It is, oh, actually, maybe I'll wait a little bit. I see another one coming in. Okay. Let's see. I will probably wait for like another 30 seconds if anyone else is burning to give me an answer. Okay, so the answer here is B. This is Waterfall, and because of the information that's given, it's basically given the criteria of very detailed requirements. And typically it's a very specific thing where the game design, game mechanics are copied exactly, right? So it's a pretty straightforward process. There isn't much, there actually isn't any iteration that's implied here. So whereas game development actually is quite iterative, this is a case where it would be. Building of the Hoover Dam. The project, so to take a step back, Agile and Waterfall oftentimes apply to software methodologies development, but not necessarily, right? So let's look at the case of Hoover Dam. So project involved a well-defined set of requirements and a clear plan for how the dam would be constructed, with each phase of the project being completed before moving on to the next. A, B, C, or D? I'll give like another 20 seconds. Okay, I see some answers coming in. All right. Okay, so I think everyone has answered this question correctly. It is B. This is definitely a waterfall project. It's considered one of the most very high profile and successful one that was really detailed and planned at a very a high level detail with and the thing is, I think what you can see is some of the language that's here is some of what was used as described as defining waterfall in general. For example, each phase of the project being completed before moving to the next, well-defined set of requirements, right? So that's that is classic waterfall stuff. Let's see. Did they call it waterfall planning when they built the Hoover? Probably not. I think that waterfall wasn't actually applied as a term until Agile people wanted to change it and they called it waterfall. So that's my basic understanding. I don't think that waterfall was applied to methodology back. So example number 3, the creation of Twitch. Twitch is a live streaming platform that was originally developed as a spin-off from Justin TV, a video streaming platform. A lot of you guys probably know what Twitch is. So team is organized as small cross-functional teams are responsible for different aspects of the platform. And yeah, in case, I always find this a very interesting thing that like Justin Khan, the founder of Twitch, had a camera following around for like 24 hours a day, and then later on try to open up this platform to see what would be popular. And yeah, lo and behold, people love watching other people play video games. Pretty shocking stuff, huh? So any other answers? Okay, maybe another 10 seconds. Less people answer. Okay, I see some others. So most people actually answered this correctly. It is A. This is a classic example of Agile. Both from the perspective of how the teams are organized and how they function using Scrum and using sprints, but also from a product discovery process, right? Like, where basically they would test a hypothesis and see from the data where the traction was going, and they sort of doubled down on that. And one thing led to another, Twitch was one. So, I think in all respects, you kind of think about this as Agile. Number 4. Building of a skyscraper. Oh, Justin came and spoke at Gigster HQ a few times. Oh, that's super cool. He's also an investor with Space Runners, so we also have some correspondence with him. So okay, sorry, I'm getting distracted. So building with skyscraper. Sorry. Skyscrapers require significant upfront planning, especially in terms of architectural and engineering design. There was another sentence that I put here where basically, oh, sorry, I think it was another version, but I will repeat this verbally. There was another sentence that's meant to be illustrative. Basically, at high altitudes, there can be the risk of high winds and uncertain weather conditions. Any other guesses? Another 5 seconds or so. Okay. A lot of you put B, and I think without that last sentence, you would be probably right. Skyscrapers are, from I'm not a skyscraping engineer, but from what I've read, these are actually typically Agile Fall projects where there's a huge ton of upfront planning that's involved, from like even what's mentioned here, architectural, engineering, design. But there is a component of it that becomes agile in the construction because there's uncertainty during the building process, and that was what was supposed to be intended by my saying high altitudes, high winds, other uncertain conditions. Um, a little bit of a trick question, but yeah, that just goes to show that the nature of an agile fall project can be very specific, right? In terms of where the agile part might come in. So last one, a hypothetical product and design workflow where in a product discovery phase, the product manager works in a silo and defines the user stories for a feature at an excessive level of detail. The UI UX designer is asked to provide visual polish for the PM's design. And I was surprised to actually find some kind of example where we actually have this, but but yeah, this is very close at least. So in this scenario, is what's going on an example of agile, waterfall, agile fall, or none of the above? Let's take a look. Nobody's guessing this. Anybody else? Okay, I actually see several different answers. I think that this one is actually there's a bit of a gray area, and for that reason, I would personally go with none of the above, but I'll explain why. This is actually what's implied here is certain aspects of it, both agile and waterfall. For example, writing user stories, right? Product discovery phase, and there are things here that make us think of waterfall as well. For example, works in a silo. Um, and so one might think that maybe it's also Agile Fall, but like this is actually what I would describe this as a form of dysfunctional Agile, where basically someone who's a product owner is actually not working in a product owner role. So it's really a misapplication of how Agile is supposed to function, especially from a Scrum perspective. And unfortunately, I've actually seen this happen, where essentially a product manager, product owner will try to do a developer's job, in this case, design. But it's not actually waterfall from what we described, in the sense where working in a silo is kind of symptomatic sometimes of what happens in waterfall. But what we described before as definition was more along the lines of linear development, long sequential phases, and like handoff process. So it's not waterfall either. I think the best probably none of the above, but this certainly is something that could be argued as well. I don't think that that's necessarily like 100% the right answer. So let's talk about some misconceptions. What have we learned so far? For one, waterfall often gets a bad rap, but there's actually lots of successful waterfall projects out there. Like one of them, being the Hoover Dam. Another one, Space Shuttle from 1972, and also the Human Genome Project, which ended in 2003. And these are high-profile ones, and of course, there's many others. Bad rap tends to come from misapplication, right? So software development often occurs, as we know, in conditions of uncertainty, and waterfall really isn't well suited for that, because in waterfall, as we mentioned, there's typically like one long development cycle and no iteration, right? So it's kind of like what you see here, kind of jamming a peg into a circle. That being said, agile isn't a silver bullet either, right? So for example, could you imagine like someone learning how to be a surgeon through agile, right? So for example, I just made this up, right? But imagine that there are sprints where you might get requirements from some kind of videos, where then you might go through some time box development process, You perform this to get to the definition of done, you evaluate the results, and you iterate. Agile typically doesn't work that well when there are like high stakes kinds of conditions because, like with many iterations, there are many opportunities to fail. And those are really good things, in general, like there are opportunities for learning, but when there are, when there are things that work conditions where, failure can be, can have a much bigger consequence, Agile probably isn't the right fit. So it's also worth noting that Agile projects fail at a lower rate. So like again, this is just to highlight that Agile still isn't perfect. There, you can kind of see it as a comparison, especially among the larger projects. Like there's a lower rate of failure for Agile, but there's still failure. Like there's opportunities to fail both whether you're Agile or waterfall, right? And a good way to think about this fit is in terms of like this lens of certainty and uncertainty, right? So as mentioned, like waterfall can succeed in some conditions of certainty where the requirements are well known and they're not likely to change. So that way, in that perspective, a linear development style actually works quite well, especially if you have the right requirements and things don't change, then you can just execute on them. So and some of those like bigger waterfall projects sort of prove that. Whereas Agile thrives in certain conditions of uncertainty where requirements are likely to change, which is in many cases a lot of plays, like what happens in software development, right? And in that kind of situation, an iterative approach is oftentimes needed, right? So one of the things we can think about is the methods as tools, right? So as an example, just think about the whether it's agile or waterfall, that they're really different kind of tools that you can use given the kind of projects you're working on, the business goals, product goals, etc. Um, and like for here, as some examples, Scrum, Kanban, Safe, Lean, those are all different methods for Agile, and there's Fall. If it were Agile Fall, I think the knife would look kind of like this. I don't think it's just one tool, but in fact, there's many. And one thing to think about is that Agile Fall is actually quite prevalent, but it's not that well understood. There's not that much documentation about it. But one way to conceptualize this is if there's at one end of the spectrum, what we might call pure Agile, and the other pure waterfall. A hybrid approach might be not just one thing, but like a spectrum of things where there's different shades of some projects being, like highly agile, but some waterfalls, maybe some that are like 50-50 and others that like might be more pure, like skewed towards waterfall. There's different shades of that. And as a result, I think you could also think of them as different tools in a way, like methodological tools. So let's look at some examples through case studies. So I sort of just made this up. But for the sake of this discussion, I'm calling it the AW ratio, or the agile slash waterfall ratio, which is really intended to capture relative percent of agile and waterfall on a project. And there isn't any rigorous methodology here with the scoring. This is mainly based upon my own experience having worked on a number of these projects. So for example, one of the scoring might be something like 70-30. Oh, do I have to? Okay. Case one, game development cycles. So this is something where Agile Fall is very, very common. So, and it's something that I have been through many times. So especially in the case of console games, using the publisher model, it is very, very common. The way this works is typically there would be an ideation discovery process for making a game, which would then lead to prototyping of the game, leading to what we would call vertical slice, or a polished end-to-end experience of the game. At which point the core game loop is proven, and then it's also proven that you have control over the difficulty of the development, control over the difficulty in the player experience, and also the ability to just make the rest of the game. And you prove that through typically through a vertical slice type experience, which then leads to main development, alpha and beta phases, going through a feature and a content complete, and ultimately, in this process, going through QA and Gold Master, which represents release. So these different circles represent hypothetically different work streams. I actually think there's more than two of these, but you can think as one, for example, being product and game design, another one being on the art track, another being like on features, right? So it's really to illustrate that within each of these phases, that iteration is very, very common. But typically in this kind of framework, as what we described with waterfall, like you would have to pass each of these phases before the next one starts. And that's typically what we call like a stage game model. These are some games that I worked on. So and just to show the numbers here really kind of reflect my assessment of like relative agile versus waterfall. So for example, I worked on Call of Duty World at War. It was very much, very popular. You guys probably heard of Call of Duty. I was the lead designer for the Wii version. So there was some iteration, exploration there, especially in relation to player controls. But especially this game was largely, it's a platform game. It's a platform SKU based upon the main SKUs of being like Xbox 360. Actually, I think it's Xbox 360 and PlayStation. Jogging my memory a bit. Anyway, we don't have to get into that. PvZ Garden Warfare was an interesting one where I would say that it was highly agile from a game level and game design perspective, but actually quite waterfall from the character pipeline, which is something that I also managed, as that was a very predictable kind of process once we established some benchmarks. Star Wars Revenge, Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, similar to Call of Duty, about half and half. Army of Two Devils Cartel, I would characterize as more agile because of the certain circumstances that I arrived at when working on this game. There were a lot of change. The situation itself was one of high uncertainty, more so than regular console development, because in short, it was due to my recently having arrived at EA Shanghai and helping get that product to final delivery. Last year, I would cite Spider-Man 3 as mostly a waterfall kind of project. And there's also some variations here too. So for example, free-to-play games, these are three of the ones that I worked on. CSI Crime City, Godfather 5 Families and Cabana, first one's at Ubisoft. Love and Hip Hop was the one I recently worked on, probably like 2016-ish. But these, because of the fact that once we go to live ops, we start working very closely with user metrics and data, and responding in an agile perspective, making short like features and A/B tests and whatnot on the basis of what we see in the data. It's highly agile by nature. The second one here, I'm actually just taking a guess, because I actually personally have not worked on an annualized annual release sports game, for example, like a FIFA or a Madden. So, these games kind of come out every year. But as I have some friends that work on these products, it does sound like they're largely predictable in terms of like what the pipelines are, and the scope of change tends to be fairly small and controlled because of the fact that they have to make annual releases. So in this case, it actually does make sense for this kind of game to be like more skewed towards waterfall, right? And then there is case two, which is software development, right? So as Corey mentioned, oh wait, I'm missing. Okay, sorry. Corey said, super interesting, makes sense. I've never thought about free-to-play games more agile because of user metrics drive so much of the experience and future features. Yes. Yes, it's definitely something that I found from experience. So pretty interesting stuff. Yeah, so anyway, let's continue. So case two, software development. So this is some examples to illustrate from Gigster, and Gigster I also describe as largely Agile Fall projects as well, but also skewing more towards Agile. Okay, here basically within Gigster's model, highly Agile teams. Everyone's super talented, very skilled, and everyone typically knows Agile. We have very aggressive sprints. There's also waterfall aspects here as well. So like we typically get Gigster operates with a fixed scope kind of model, where we also have milestone goals, which are actually delivered at the end of each sprint. So they're really kind of like mini stage gates in a way. Um, but because of this kind of framework, it does sort of uh, very much resemble in some ways game development in that there are these phases, but like you can think of these phases actually being smaller, right? So the certain and the work streams are a bit different because we don't have gameplay, we don't have 3D typically. So in typical software products, we have scoping that happens with product manager and technical architect, followed by UI UX design, followed by development, and then release, which is typically like a QA UAT production process. And you can see by these circles, relative degree of iteration is involved. And because of the fixed scope model, in many cases, there's less iteration on the development side, but lots going on in scoping and the UI UX side. But that does also vary from project to project as well. So I've also been on some that have had more iteration on the development side as well. So it does really vary, but I think that the overall framework that Gigster has works under has proven quite well. That shows that this flavor of Agile Fall is quite effective. Um, and at the and below you can see some of the clients, but I don't want to actually correlate specific clients with projects, but like I wanted to just kind of show as an example a sampling of some of the projects that I've been on. So I've been worked on about a dozen, um, and basically you can see that like most of them are I would rate as more like skewing on the high agile side, especially in regards where there's more innovation, more product discovery related to the project. So for example, the VR healthcare app that was designed to help combat social anxieties, autism by virtual reality. There's also AI-powered social media. There's also other apps, for example, this was also like an innovative product, healthcare consulting on demand. There was crypto exchange one. So a lot of these I would skew, with this kind of hybrid framework. This one definitely, with Gigster's model, I would say it does skew more towards the agile. But even some projects here, were like very few were more waterfall in nature. Like for example, there was one that was an account aggregator, but I think that was also by design. So a couple other things were of mention. So post after Gigster, I became a director of product at OKCoin. And this was very heavily, to my surprise, it was a waterfall style development where development was based in China. Management style was like a kind of top-down type of way of operating. Where I am right now, we work on 0 to 1 type products. We've also released digital assets or NFT collections. So yeah, I would say that we work under, it's very in many ways it's kind of like an inverse of this crypto exchange experience, despite being still involved in Web3 in either. Here I would describe, basically we're like pure agile, but some game development as well. So some of that methodology that we're strengthening in, and the style management is also different, being more the servant leadership model. Last but not least, third case here is in regards to agile coaching, as I think I think Corey briefly mentioned, but yeah, but for about 15 months, also during Gigster days, I served as an agile coach for a retirement fund. And the thing of note here is that the starting point of when they started was they're almost completely waterfall, and they were also not targeting becoming like a pure agile shop. Like doing so would actually mean that the whole org would have to be reorged in a way, which is in many cases companies don't want that. But at the same time, there was a recognition that the current way that software development was being done was what we could have been benefited by more agile principle adoption. So I worked there for about 15 months, and the end goal of this was really to adopt more. So I would describe this as going from like 2 to slash 98 to about maybe 20% agile, but still mainly, mainly waterfallish. Again, things may have changed since I left, but this was very much considered a success. And one thing to keep in mind is that not all companies want the level of agile that's described in the Scrum Guide and whatnot. So there's some takeaways, right? Actually, any questions first? Like I noticed that I've gone a little bit faster than I thought. Let me check the time. Oh, we're okay. But any questions on what I described? Anybody? Okay, I'll go to takeaways. So, is there a superior method? It's a really good question. I think it depends upon the use case, and what you want to achieve from a business, in terms of business outcomes. Like if you're working under conditions of great certainty, where you have a plan where it's basically just you can't develop these very detailed requirements, and it's like likely that requirements won't change. Waterfall may work. The whole you can kind of think about the whole educational system as being like waterfall, right? Like people go, we think about ourselves going through like the process of going through middle school, high school, college, advanced education, advanced degree. Again, it's not necessarily required in some areas, but for some things like law, medicine, they are. I mean, those look a lot like waterfall processes to me. Whereas, but taking a step back, if we think of software development in general, typically agile is more effective. Like we see that from some of that data that I showed in that graph. Like less projects fail under agile because uh, projects are given the chance to iterate. And if you have like many shots on the goal versus one, typically like having those iteration, especially under conditions where things change, will give you, it definitely from an objective perspective, agile is superior in that way. But there's different flavors of agile, which I'm trying to say with Agile Fall is that a lot of projects that look agile, like typically also have some waterfall aspects of it as well, right? But great question. How to be agile in fixed budget projects? Now that is a really good question. Can I finish just, I only have a couple slides first. So let me get back to that question because that is a very, I think, important one. But let's see. So some of the trends here, like I did this pretty roughly, and this is really just, you can envision that this would be a bit of a line anyway, right? Because these numbers both add up to 100. So, but some of the trends here we're seeing is that basically like the ones more at the top are, I would say, like especially given, and just keep in mind that this is like with a disclaimer. I've worked on and shipped about 25 games over the years. But like I think that this is pretty much true, especially with live ops games that there's a tendency for those to be more agile by nature because you don't know what the user metrics is going to or what kind of story that those are going to give, right? So it does also for you to be effective, one would have to be agile from that perspective. But also things that are rating highly up here are more innovation projects. The Army of Two situation was agile because of the specific operational circumstances that we had to go through, which were a level of agility that was more like on the operational versus on the product side. But it was very much the nature of my engagement there. And then I think a lot of console games you can kind of consider being like middle of the road, a bit of half and half. PvZ Garden Warfare is an anomaly because, like I mentioned before, part of that was very waterfall character pipeline, but another part was very innovative because I worked on the first one. Our team actually innovated on the like a what we call the butterfly map levels, which are like a hybrid team deathmatch and co-op. So we created a new map style, and innovate on the core mechanics and the some of the early really like early prototype levels. So that's the reason why this one scores very highly on the agile perspective as well. I put this here to again just be mindful about like Gigster just the Gigster projects. But here, like I would just rate generally rate like the innovation apps, from different kinds of apps there as being as more as more agile, especially in regards to product discovery process, or use more like lean startup design thinking. Typically what I found, like still the norm of the Gigster projects that I've worked on were still quite agile, like despite being, within like the fixed scope type of framework. We just worked in a highly agile way throughout. One of them was probably lower on the agile waterfall scale, and of course agile coaching sort of implies that the company will probably be like more waterfall in nature. So here I put my experience at OK Point and also my agile coaching. So let me just finish. There's only 2 more slides left. Lessons learned. So I learned that this was really too big of a topic for one session. There's a lot that I wanted to talk about, and I actually unfortunately ran out of time. So you have to pardon me for that. But just some brief takeaways, one of which I think really is one of the most important things, I think, is really that if you think about agile, like oftentimes it's referred to as a methodology in colloquial language, right? But fundamentally, agile is meant to be, it is a set of principles and values. And as a result, like when we think about things like agile transformation, those are cultural changes where they're changes of people's mindsets and behaviors. And that's really the most important thing. That's really at the core of agile, where like this set of principles and values informs the methodologies, and the methodologies exist to serve the principles, right? It's kind of like the saying, like, the finger is pointing to the moon. Don't mistake, don't mistake the finger for the moon. It's the same thing, right? Like, don't mistake agile for being the methodology. It is at core the set of values and principles. And that has far-reaching effects. Lessons learned part 2. So from methods perspective, again, agile and waterfall can succeed in their own right, right? Like again, sometimes waterfall is being used with like some negative connotation, but it's largely due to misapplication. There are circumstances in which waterfall projects can function quite well, and some that are also better suited than even agile projects, especially when there's situations of high consequence. Agile is also not perfect. It's best suited where there's iterations and changes. And one thing to keep in mind is, I hope that it was hopefully illustrated that Agile Fall really can't be described as a single methodology. So there's from what I've experienced, many different forms because of, from a project, team to team, company basis, based upon the business goals. Largely, for example, like a game, for example, might want maybe better suited as waterfall if it was highly predictable. And then you need to get out, a certain time with minimal changes, like for example, with some of the AAA sports games. And last but not least, not all companies want to be pure agile. So, it's important also not to be dogmatic and assume that like, hey, I'm agile, like everyone wants this. And it's actually not true. I think it's in Silicon Valley, it's probably true. And a lot of modern tech companies, but it's a bit presumptuous to also assume that everybody just wants pure agile, right? So again, like think about the spectrum as being like really like a number of different tools as representing different methodologies, and hopefully that will give you a sense of from my experience what Agile Fall is, and hopefully that was helpful. So let's get back to a question: how to be agile in fixed budget projects? Um, Great question again. So I think the things to think about are what are the, from like a general project perspective, where are the levers that we typically have to adjust, right? Like, there's budget, there's scope slash quality, there's time. And you can't have all three, right? So in the fixed budget, what's interesting is that Gigster has gotten very good at this, and I've learned how to also function well within this, where there is a fixed scope and fixed budget, but you can still be agile. And it's something that I think isn't taught, and I can only speak from my own experience. But I found that while the high level scope, which correlates with budget, is settled on, this is where the part of negotiation can come into play. Like, so for example, even though that, we are, making this project with X number of features, those features may be swapped, they may be reprioritized. So you can think about the high level scope as being fixed, but within that, at least from like a Gigster, B2B fixed scope project perspective, those pieces can actually change. And those are largely some things that can be negotiated with the client that you're working with. So that's been probably like something that I've also experienced a number of times, is that we start something, we think we want exactly A, B, C, D, Y, but maybe it's D, B, C, G, I, right? Something like that, where the relative scope still actually is the same, but like what we discovered during that process, especially as we go through an agile iterative process, that some things are more important and prioritized than other things that were deprioritized. So that's how it can work. Hopefully that hopefully that's pretty clear. But let me know if not. And yeah, any other questions? Like, this is pretty much it. I'm leaving on the frame of stable diffusion generated Spider-Man over Niagara Falls. Uh, you may notice he might have a foot imperfection, but yeah, it serves a purpose. So anyway, that's pretty much it. I'm gonna stop sharing. I'll be happy to answer any questions. No problem. No problem.
Yeah, no, I thought it was great, and the question around how to how do you deliver agilely underneath a fixed price budget is a great question, and is something I think that a lot of us have. Well, I don't want to say us because not me, because I don't handle on the delivery side. I've kind of had to learn to work in, but it's the other interesting part around the agile part is when you start to look at these like different delivery methodologies in the context like of a business, when you have like in other dependent things coming in like budget, timelines, like marketing, like when do we start pushing out PR, you start having a lot of these other business dependencies to hit dates, to hit budget lines. So how do you still say agile in the sense that you can kind of like iterate, yet you can still give solid answers to the PR team when they're like, when should we have the billboards ready to start pushing this, right? So always is that kind of like push and pull, which I think is super, super interesting. But man, thank you so much for the time today. This was incredible. I definitely learned some stuff, and we will be putting this up and sharing. But if anyone wants to follow you, connect with you, or anything like that, where's the best place for them to do so?
Um, yeah, you can, I wasn't expecting that. So I guess you could find me on social media. I'm not a big social media person, but I have accounts. um,
LinkedIn, anything?
but yeah.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
good. Well,
look forward for the questions. Really great questions, and hopefully people learn stuff. And this was a great experience for me to put this stuff together as well, and really happy to share some stuff. It just made me realize that it's kind of the tip of the iceberg. It made me realize this topic is actually quite big. So
mhm.
hopefully people got some.
Awesome. Well, man, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again for stopping by, and look forward to checking you out on the next one.
All right. Thanks, Corey.
All right.
Have a good one.
See you
Thanks,
guys.
everybody. See ya. Bye.
And with that, Anthony Doe, people, that was fantastic. Again, Agile Fall. If you want to learn more, check this out. We'll be turning this into reels and other stuff. But as always, we'll be on more expert talks coming soon. We'll be dropping the link to the website below if you want to check out what those are. But if not, thanks for stopping by. And with that, Keith, run the outro video guy. Do your thing. Do your job. Do it.